Hello and welcome back to Not Even Mad, the show where we retain our poise, our sang-froid, even in the face of, say, an Oval Office act of ungratitude, an affront of not wearing a suit. Today we speak of all the best parts of Donald Trump's first 45 days, including that corker of a State of the Union-esque address, because not only both houses of Congress, but so many, many special guests in the gallery were enraptured. We also ponder the question, the eternal question, what should the Democrats have done? We do this while we uphold our reputation for refutation, because we're not even mad. Who are we? It's the Dream Team again. Michael A. Cohen, columnist for MSNBC, author of American Maelstrom, the 1968 election and the politics of division, and Liz Wolfe, an editor at Reason Magazine and host of the Just Asking Questions podcast. Michael, Liz, welcome back. I do think of you guys as like when Charles Nelson Riley was in the center square. You're the go-tos. You're the ones we love.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
I don't know. Maybe, Liz, you're more of a Jim J. Bullock era family.
Wow.
I almost said family ties. I almost said tic-tac-toe, but it's Hollywood Squares. Yes.
I don't want to be Charles Nelson O'Reilly. That's the only thing I care about.
Charles Nelson Riley. Right.
Charles Nelson Riley?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Fine.
Yes, Charles Nelson Riley. So, of the speech that we saw, Michael, I'll start with you. I'm sure you will say you don't love all of Trump's policies and you probably like his character and comportment even less. But we're there, and I'll also allow you to pick out moments that weren't terrible if you want to go in that direction. But were there aspects to what you saw or just aspects to what you've been hearing that fits in with what he says and how he says it that you want to point out as being especially disturbing or especially, let's say, dangerous?
You know, I have to make a confession here. I actually only watched about 30 minutes of the speech and then I turned it off because I couldn't.
So 1/8.
Yeah, 1/8.
It went long. Yeah.
That was just the prologue. Basically, it was just one lie after another. You know, one ridiculous boast after another, one childish insult after another. I thought calling Joe Biden the worst president ever was just so disgusting. I mean, even if you think that's true, and I don't think that's true, you don't say that at a State of the Union address. It's supposed to be a time of national unity, somewhat. I mean, union, it's in the title. I know it was not officially State of the Union, but, you know, it more or less is. I just found the whole thing unseemly and gross. And, you know, as far as the politics of it, the one thing I'll say about State of the Unions, and I've always held this view, they have no real political impact whatsoever. And I mean, remember last year's State of the Union? Joe Biden, he gave this really great rip-roaring speech. Yeah, how'd that work out for him? So I just think that it doesn't really mean all that much, and the proof is going to come, you know, in the pudding with these tariffs and with the economic impact, which I think is only getting worse. So, you know, I don't think it matters all that much what he said or what he did.
Liz, talk tariffs or talk, because Cohen was talking about the lies, talk the Doge cuts, because I think you're temperamentally inclined to want them to work. But when they're as sloppy as they have been, and when, if you fact check the 15 or so examples he gave, a full 10 of them don't hold up to scrutiny, does that massively undercut the project?
Yeah, I believe that the State of the Union last night, as well as the sort of broader Doge project, suffer from being directionally correct, but totally wrong on the specifics. And to me, that matters, right? Because I'm a libertarian and I work at a magazine that has been advocating for making massive cuts to the size of the federal government. We've been advocating this for almost 6 decades now, right? So this is something where we have a lot of stake in this project. Like, we are journalists who lay our cards on the table. This is what we care about. So you would think that this would be extreme cause for celebration, that now finally we have a president that's really prioritizing this. The only problem is that he's pretending to prioritize this. He's paying lip service to a lot of this, but I don't think he's actually going to make these cuts in a way that's good at all. One quote that stuck out to me from last night's speech was, "For nearly 100 years, the federal bureaucracy has grown until it has crushed our freedoms, ballooned our deficits, and held back America's potential in every possible way."
Yeah,
A
that could be
nation
a reason
founded-
editorial, right?
Exactly. The nation founded by pioneers and risk takers now drowns under millions and millions of pages of regulation and debt. Approvals that should take 10 days to get instead take 10 years, 15 years, and even 20 years before you get rejected. Okay, literally true. Like, I am so on board. Like, I want to drink this Kool-Aid. But I'm sorry, Trump is not actually making any meaningful progress, I don't think, yet on this. I am open to being surprised. Earlier in that speech, he was touting some of the cuts to Social Security, specifically stamping out fraud that's been happening under Elon Musk and Doge. And again, like, to the extent that that is true, to the extent that there is Social Security fraud happening, okay, amazing. This is low-hanging fruit. And I think a lot of what Doge has been doing for the last, 6 weeks or however long it's been in action has been going after the low-hanging fruit. The thing that I would implore them to do, though, is after you get through the low-hanging fruit, then you have to go for the higher up fruit, and you must continue the culling. You must continue the exercise. I mean, to your point, Michael, about the Trump lies in the State of the Union, as he was touting the accomplishments of Doge with culling fraud from the Social Security Administration, he was citing totally untrue numbers. The whole litany of, government databases list 4.7 million Social Security numbers from people aged 100 to 109 years old. It lists 3.6 million people from ages 110 to 119. He went through it and was talking all about
He
it.
took every 10-year range and talked about in an extremely inaccurate way.
Which, by the way, it's technically
so.
And then he talks about how they're receiving benefits. Okay, like it's technically true because there's some weird quirk of the programming language that it's coded in, and so there's like some of the old Social Security entries lack dates of death, but it is absolutely not true that these people are receiving Social Security benefits. Everybody.
That's true that they're in the system, but the important thing is, and therefore we're saving money. There's no evidence they're saving any money. They're just someone with a wrong date in the system.
Yeah,
go ahead, Michael.
No, I was just saying, like that section where you read off the 10 years, like with this. In this weird sort of sing-songy voice, it was like the drum solo part of the speech. I mean, it was just so awful and boring.
Yeah. That's when everyone who goes to a jam band knows to do the drugs. Yeah.
Here's why it bothers me so much, though, and I feel like I'm getting fired up. Like I'm the only person in the history of the world who's like getting really fired up about Social Security fraud and his partial truths, his untruths here. But the reason why it really bothers me is because legitimately, like entitlement reform, as unsexy as it may be, is super, super needed. And I feel like he just really undermines this message when he acts like, oh, well, the way we get to Social Security solvency is simply by cutting all of this crazy fraud and the millions and millions of 250-year-olds who are getting payments. And it's like, dude, if only it were that easy, but it's not. And it will take real political consensus building and real trade-offs to actually get to entitlement reform. Instead, he's just forcing us to go into this very unserious, frankly, quite stupid realm. And that makes me sad.
Yeah, I just want to say, the record, the whole concept of waste, fraud, and abuse is sort of what politicians say when they want to cut spending in the abstract, but don't actually want to cut spending. It's like, we're not going to really cut your Social Security benefits. We're going to cut waste, fraud, and abuse. And I think one of the interesting things about this whole experience with Doge is that they have had a very poor time finding a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. Maybe there isn't that much of it as people think there is. And I will say one thing, by the way, about the fraud point that Liz brought up. I was looking into this because last week, Trump made this statement about we're not going to cut Medicaid. We're looking for fraud in Medicaid. Okay. Is there a lot of fraud in Medicaid? Turns out there's like about $100 billion a year, which is actually seems like a lot, but really isn't that much compared to how much Medicare spends, which is in the trillions of dollars. But one of the ways that you deal with Medicaid fraud, one of the ways that Medicaid fraud the government's gotten better at finding it, identifying it. They actually call it improper payments, not fraud, to be specific, but whatever. The way they take out these improper payments is by putting more people on the case, right? They hire more people. So if you want to actually get at fraud out of Medicaid, there's a way to do it. You actually have to hire more people with the experience to be able to look and find fraud and find these cases and stop these improper payments. But instead, they're cutting thousands of jobs from HHS and CMS, Center for Medicaid Services, Medicare and Medicaid Services. So basically, they're not if this is meant to improve efficiency, it's having the opposite effect. Same thing at the IRS. They want to cut thousands of employees at the IRS, which is making it harder actually to collect taxes. Collect tax on people who are cheating on their taxes. This is not making the government more efficient. It is actually making the government less efficient. Well, by the way, I wrote about this last week, scaring off anybody in the federal government who actually cares about their job and wants to be a public servant. By the way, and there are many of them. And just as a reminder, a third of all federal employees are veterans. Many of them go from military service to work in government, and they're being pushed out. Who wants to say a government like this that is being treated like children, and which is the way that Musk and Trump are treating them right now?
I really disagree with the idea that there's not very much waste in government. I mean, the fact of the matter, I think the truth of it is we don't know. And I appreciate DOGE as a first step toward auditing a lot of the sort of overgrown federal bureaucracy.
Well, the GOA says
there are tons of audits of the federal government. The GAO does, that's what the GAO does.
And every year they say there's at least $250 million, but that's just what they can find, although they can't find it so specifically as to cut it out. But go ahead, Liz.
Yeah, I do think that there are a few things that come to mind here. Number one is a lot of the DOGE cuts to USAID, I think, make sense, perhaps not from an effective altruist perspective, right? Like cutting the PEPFAR program, for example, the administering of HIV/AIDS drugs in far-flung countries. That's very upsetting because that is probably a relatively good use of, for every dollar spent, that's a lot of lives saved. But I do think, that's the example of the best possible USAID type program. There's also, as we discovered with Elon Musk really taking a sledgehammer to it, there's a lot of really stupid stuff that USAID is funding too. I mean, I know it was a Fox News talking point, but legitimately, a lot of the sort of soft power arts and culture initiatives related to LGBTQI acceptance in far-flung countries is not something that I think taxpayers in the middle of America in Iowa especially want their money being spent on. There's nothing from in the Constitution that indicates that that's something that our money ought to be seized and put towards, nor I think do most Americans actually see that as in line with their values or a worthwhile thing to spread.
Why is standing up for LGBTQ citizens who are being discriminated against not an American value? That's absolutely American value. I mean, vulnerable people who are being mistreated, that seems very good. And by the way, I'm an American. I'm a taxpaying American. I live in a city that has 3.5 million people live here. And I think that's great use of American funding. I think foreign aid is one of the best things that we do.
But that's not foreign aid, right? That's funding an arts program to support a leftist value. Which is something that at least half of the country is not necessarily keen on that. And especially at a time when our federal debt is $36 trillion, I think it's very fair for the American taxpayers to say, wait a second, this doesn't feel especially democratic for you to be attempting to fund, these types of initiatives. PEPFAR, I think, is a much more reasonable thing to spend money on.
I just want to say that, if Donald Trump thinks this is a left-wing value to spend money on this, fine. He should go back to Congress next year when they negotiate the budget and say, take that out of the budget. What he shouldn't do is after Congress has already appropriated, authorized money for this program, and by the way, a Republican-controlled Congress, okay? This money that's being spent right now came from a Republican-controlled Congress, House controlled by Republicans, Senate controlled by Republicans. Most Republicans voted for it. You can't then, after it's been appropriated and authorized, say, you know what, I don't want to spend this money. That's not how this works. The executive branch doesn't have that power, and the Supreme Court today, thankfully, said you can't just cancel these payments. So people don't like what the AID is doing, fine. There's a forum in which you can do that. But to cut money off from programs, literally people are dying.
Well, not because their operas aren't being funded, right? They're not.
That's fine.
They're dying because of the pulling of PEPFAR funding.
Those things are being conflated. And if you don't like the opera, which I think was like a couple thousand, tens of thousands of dollars, which is nothing compared to a $60 billion budget, fine. Then say to Congress, don't appropriate the money for that next year, and they won't. But you can't do it in the middle of when you've already appropriated the money. You're screwing over the funders, people you're supporting, and you're screwing up America's good name around the world. Imagine if you were relying on that money. Now you think much less of America. And what you're seeing in a lot of these places where AID gets left is that China is coming in and saying, hey, we'll pay for this stuff.
Well, to be clear, China's not funding the trans operas, right?
Who knows?
She does not care.
You never know. I don't know. Maybe. Probably not. Probably not.
China is funding Madame Butterfly, not M. Butterfly. So the trans opera is actually a State Department funding, that one in Colombia. And it is fine, I think. Michael, I agree with you in general, but you have to admit if there was a line item referendum, a plebiscite on the trans opera or the comic book that celebrated LGBT, it would definitely go down. I know that's not how it works, but it's not a popular expenditure. And if the president wants to use the bully pulpit to make accurate points, that's his prerogative. I object more to when he makes the inaccurate points of talking about transgender mice, just like reading it wrong, or I think he just pronounced instead of larval fish populations, he said lavish fish. So that is just stupidity. But then there's the argument, if we want to talk about U.S. aid funding. So you and I, Liz, both agree that PEPFAR is not only deeply humanitarian, it probably is very good for the United States reputation to be saving these people's lives, or, it's bad for the United States interest to have so many people, to have the continent of Africa fall into an AIDS crisis. Well, even a dollar expenditure that goes even further than the PEPFAR drugs is programs to convince sub-Saharan African men to voluntarily get circumcised. And when Donald Trump laughs at male circumcision, as opposed to female circumcision, which we certainly shouldn't be funding, male circumcision in Mozambique, and it gets a laugh, and an ignorant, backwards, bullyish laugh, what he's saying is that this program, which is really cost effective in stopping the spread of AIDS because it evokes a penis, deserves to get mocked in front of both houses of Congress. It doesn't make me proud. I do want to ask you one thing about the Doge expenditures. Is your point, Liz, that you think all he really is after is a headline and an exaggeration about what they found, and there is no real commitment to do any of the real cutting? Because I hear a lot of, let us say, cross-cutting analysis that says, the real problem with what Donald Trump is doing is now it only seems like silly tens of millions for programs. But what it really shows is he's going to do deep cuts. He's going to gut the bureaucracy, and this will allow him to run roughshod over the system. But are you putting your finger more on actually, you don't think he wants to do that? You don't think he has the will to do that? All he wants is the headline.
I honestly don't know yet. And it is very, very hard to suss out the sort of ideological commitment of both Trump and Musk, two, famously volatile and unpredictable people. And so I maintain hopes that this is a deep commitment to actually cutting the overgrown federal bureaucracy and attempting to, I think, to take them as seriously as I possibly can, and to try to make the case to your viewers that there is value in this. I do think that there are a lot of American taxpayers like you, Michael, who may feel very comfortable with how your money is spent. I, for one, do not. And, there's a whole bunch of different ways this actually gets played out. I look at, it's not that I am an anarchist who wants there to be no federal government at all, but I look at, the amount of union influence. The federal government employee union has been very outspoken in opposition to a lot of these DOGE-related staffing cuts, these workforce cuts. And that makes me very frustrated, not because I don't believe that, unions, there's some role for them, but there's something very frustrating to me about public sector unions that so frequently create this dynamic where they're arguing, against employees being held to the same standard that private sector employees are, where good incentives are created for performance, where they can be hired easily and they can be fired easily. And at least for me, if I'm the one funding these employees, it's important to me that the incentives be properly aligned, that we're actually hiring the best possible people for the jobs, and that we're not ultimately giving them what amounts to lifetime employment that allows them to, in some cases, not all cases, sit on their asses. To me, that feels like a very poor stewardship of the money that I was forced to hand over to the government. So that's one thing where, when I look at the workforce reductions, I feel optimistic, for example. But another thing that really bothers me is that I don't think that we're getting these really negative indicators that Musk doesn't actually have a deep ideological commitment to this. One way is that he's basically going about all of the workforce reduction stuff by saying, we're going to fire the probationary employees who've just been in the government for a year or two. And then he's talking up about how, they're really going to restore meritocracy to the federal government. This bothers me because just because an employee is new and thus easy to fire per the sort of weird arrangement sorted out between the government and the employee unions. There's something very frustrating about just because somebody's new doesn't mean they're in fact a low performer. It doesn't mean they're an unmotivated bad employee who's a drain on the agency that they're working for. What would be better is if you found ways to actually change the employment structure of federal government employees, and then you actually did performance evaluations and a deeper, more thorough audit, which would take, yes, time and manpower, but I think that would be really worthwhile. And that would be the way that you can attempt to begin to write the incentives within the federal government's workforce. The fact of the matter is Musk has instead basically said, nope, probation employees are sacked. And doing that to probationary employees, I don't think is especially fair, but it also is in tension with what Musk is saying is his goal, which is meritocracy. So I would say I'm a huge fan of limited government. I'm a huge fan of, restoring the use of taxpayer dollars to what American taxpayers have legitimately consented to. And I'm a huge fan of just attempting to cull a lot of the waste and a lot of the nonsense. But the problem is Musk isn't necessarily doing that. And I'm not convinced that he has the sort of durable attention span and deep commitment to those actual principles. So I'm not sure that we're playing on the same team, truthfully.
I just need to push back on what you just said, because I think that is I'm sorry to say, that's kind of a really unfair disbursement of the federal bureaucracy. And the idea that people who are working in the bureaucracy are not working hard, that they're lazy. Do you know that the size of the federal government, federal workforce today is the same as it was in 1969? That's non-military. So the same size as it was in 69. And what that tells you, and by the way, the government is much larger now than it was in 69. And what that tells you is that the federal workforce is stretched to the bone. Okay, this is not a workforce of people who just sit around all day and twiddle their thumbs from 9 to 5. These people who work hard.
Well, that's hard, but it's 2 million people. There's surely some of those. There's surely some.
How do you know that?
Because anytime you have a group of 2 million, anytime you have a group of 2 million people, there are some who are lazy and there are some
I'm
who
sure that there are
motivated.
some who are lazy, but the vast majority, I'm sure, of people who are in the federal government,
How do
like
we
in
know?
any business, are, I'm sure, very good at their jobs. And by the way, there are tons of evaluations, of performance reviews, of audits. And this federal government is not exactly like a great money maker. I worked in the federal government for a couple of years. You don't make good money doing it. You get good benefits.
You get a nice
that's true.
pension.
You get a nice
You get good
pension, but you do
pensions,
not.
right?
You can make a lot more money in the private sector than you can in federal government. I did.
Well,
when
you
I
get
left
good
the
job
left.
security. You get good pensions. There are a lot of benefits that
Well,
make it such a
job
rational
security.
decision
I mean,
for people.
up to now. But yes, there are benefits. That's why a lot of people do it. But I think this idea. I think one of the things that I hope comes out of this is this constant, assumption that the federal workforce is a bunch of lazy, no good, wasteful people, when in fact many of them are.
Which is not what I'm
First of all,
saying.
a third of them are veterans, and which I think is a relevant point. But also, many people who work in the federal government do so because they believe in public service. They do it because they actually want to give back to their country. I mean, this is the thing, and the way that Musk and Trump is treating them is as if they are just widgets, so they can just be replaced by somebody else. And your point on the probationary thing, I agree with you, by the way. But one thing about the probationary stuff that's really disturbing is that people who were probationary employees, people who were promoted. If you get a new job because you're good at your job, right, and you've only been there for less than 2 years, you got fired last month. I mean, that's no way to run a
But
federal
now that's
government.
being reversed. The courts have ruled against that.
But in general, I mean, the federal workforce makes up. I wrote about this, like 8%, I think it is. No, I'm sorry, it's 4% of the federal budget is the federal or salaries and benefits of the federal workforce. It is a small amount. You want to cut money. You said before that I love government spending. I do love government spending, actually. I'm a big fan of government spending. Except I don't like the $800 billion by taxpayer dollars that are spent on the Pentagon, which is very wasteful, bloated, and inefficient military dealing with threats that don't really confront the United States. I wrote a whole book about this a couple of years ago. But that's where I would love to see money being cut. If you read the New York Times today, none of that is happening. All the money being cut is in these smaller agencies like AID, like education.
Hegseth has been instructed to audit defense spending. At least that's what I read most recently.
If that happens, I'll be a first. There hasn't been audited the DoD in years.
And Musk has talked about cutting defense spending, but you could look at it two ways. Either he's not serious about it, or he's as serious as the other stuff, which is just to generate some headlines that don't actually lead to.
Well, national security and law enforcement has been what's it called, excluded from DOJ. right? Excluded from Doge
Yeah.
cuts. So they're
Yeah,
not the
I
ones.
think that that's
They're not facing this kind of scrutiny.
and I think
Well,
that
what
that's
they
incorrect, right? Like
define as national security, that doesn't
Right.
mean every Pentagon expenditure. Yeah.
no,
Right.
I'm a libertarian, so I'm not like I am in favor of auditing all of these departments, right? Like I totally agree with that. I would chafe at your notion that it's in any way heretical to say that we ought to attempt to stop insulating the federal workforce from incentives. I am not painting them all as lazy, but I am saying I feel a little bit like the same dynamic happens whenever you begin to criticize public school teachers, right? Because everybody knows and loves some public school teachers somewhere. You know, we're married to them, we're related to them. We, as children, we're so indebted to them, right? But there's a little bit of this challenge where it's like we're talking about vast numbers of people, and we're talking specifically about vast numbers of people who, in many cases, are insulated from incentives, and because they have such a high degree of job protection. I am not saying that undue scrutiny or mistreatment ought to be directed their way. But what I am saying is that the fact of the matter is we are funding their salaries. And so therefore, I think that that gives us a little bit more of an expectation of transparency as to what they're working on and an expectation of saying, hey, I value job performance in this realm because you're saying that I have to fund it. I don't have any option to opt out. And I think that it's actually important to not attempt to police the bounds of like, oh, well, it's like so untoward for you to criticize this. It's like, isn't it untoward of them to take my money and then not
Well, no.
allow me to in any way understand what it's going
What I
towards?
said was it's untoward to generalize about them, and I think that's what you were doing.
But
But
you were generalizing by saying, how hardworking. I'm just saying, I think they contain multitudes, and I think we can
of
all
course,
agree on that.
every Brexit gets multitudes. But sorry, Mike, go ahead. Yeah.
Let's be toward. I do not know, and we can't make broad statements. They're mostly lazy, they're mostly not. I know that Democrats and the ones that I've identified as understanding reality and where the frustrations of the American people are don't go on. The Democrats I'm thinking of, like Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez and Pete Buttigieg, who was very much involved in the federal bureaucracy, they won't use phrases like bureaucracy or the deep state, but they will talk about proceduralism and how many, and MGP, Gluesenkamp-Perez, talks about this a lot, how many steps you have to go through, and her example is to peel a banana. But Democrats are saying this, Democrats who are elected in, not Dem plus 20 districts. I do think that there is something to that. And I do know that you're never going to be able to get at the waste, fraud, and abuse unless you start somewhere. And I kind of think in a more perfect world, so imperfect as that there would be $250 billion in waste, fraud, and abuse, but in a more perfect world, we would have the scalpel. But I don't think that's really practical. I think that Elon Musk is not the man for the job, but his experience shows he went into Twitter, he fired 80% of the workforce, hired back the ones he needed, and Twitter is a fairly functional, you might not like it, you might not like the choices they've made, but it's a fairly functional organization that to the average person looks like the Twitter of beforehand with a hugely bloated workforce.
Okay, but the federal government, not Twitter, right? I mean, federal government is the last resort we have to protect ourselves against things like epidemics and pandemics and wars and all kinds of terrible things that happen in this country. And so you do need a federal government out there. You don't need Twitter. We could go way more and we'd be fine. The federal government performs a lot of essential functions, like for example, weather forecasting, which for some reason these idiots want to cut. Even if I take Liz's point that you want to cut government spending, you want to diminish waste or fraud or abuse, fine. The way they're going about it is so ass backwards.
Clearly.
It's not even
not
remotely
serious, and they're not actually getting at the job. I want to ask you about one more thing, which is tariffs. Now, even if you didn't hear the speech, I'll read the relevant part. And I assume libertarian, liberal, you're just people who understand economics, you're both extremely skeptical about the effects of tariffs on helping the U.S. economy. There was but one moment where Trump talked about the pain that might have to be endured just for a little while. Give me 1 second. I'm going to look that up. I had that and it fell away. Read the full speech. Stories like that. Okay. He was talking about a steel worker named Jeff. There are way too many individuals there to exemplify the points he was trying to make, most of the points being that bad immigrants have killed people. Tariffs are about making America rich again and making America great again, and it is happening and it will happen rather quickly. There will be a little disturbance, but we are okay with that. It won't be much. That was it. That was his. I thought that he had the opportunity to try to sell it. There was more about tariffs and the greatness of tariffs, but that was the one acknowledgement that there might be a little pain. And unless he does a bigger selling job, or maybe the strategy is not to talk about tariffs, but to talk about the wins he's had protecting girls from getting hit in the face by volleyballs launched from the fists of transgender opponents, and that's fair. Maybe you could talk about the big wins and then the tariffs wrecking or having a bad effect on the American economy won't be noticed. But I did think he lost an opportunity for a guy who spoke for an hour and 40 minutes. He lost an opportunity to make a stronger case of why temporary pain of tariffs were worth it.
Yeah, I feel a little bit like the lady volleyball player, and Trump is the trans opposing side athlete, and we're in a volleyball game, and the tariffs are the volleyball that's just clobbered me in the head. I mean, the the truth of it is like Trump's theory of tariffs. My colleague Eric Boehm was writing about this. Trump's theory of tariffs makes literally no sense. He seems to believe, on one hand, that there's some sort of path to greater American prosperity. And yet also, he seems to believe that there's some sort of foreign policy instrument. The only problem is he keeps trying to use them basically as his foreign policy instrument, but then he's wildly imprecise with the people that he's attempting to strong arm into changing their policies in terms of what he actually wants. What are his actual objectives? And so it ends up being, frankly, quite schizophrenic policy. And the only people who will suffer from it are the many people abroad who want to buy American products, as well as the many, many, many millions of Americans whose grocery bills are going to go up, whose gas bills are going to go up. It is so unclear to me what he thinks is going to happen. Also, by the way, markets don't really love this level of volatility. And so again, there's just a little bit of the sense of like, you believe that these tariffs, Trump, are going to make us so great and strong because you seem to have some sort of issue specifically with trade deficits. But like, explain it, like go a step, like explain how exactly this is going to improve the lives of normal Americans. I think that there will be massive revolt, massive backlash, and this is going to be, stunningly unpopular, and it's the most predictable thing. I mean, it feels like we're watching this like complete slow motion train wreck.
Can I make one addendum to that? You asked the question about why doesn't he explain about tariffs better? And my I hate to answer a question with a question. Why are we imposing tariffs in Canada? I have no friggin' clue why we're doing it. Is it because of fentanyl?
Yeah,
I mean,
0.04 ounces of fentanyl.
I mean, is that the reason why you're going to impose these vast economic hardships on American people because of less than half a pound of fentanyl? I mean, it makes
Trudeau's theory, it's an
sense.
effort to make it the 51st state. And Trudeau is rising, or his party's rising in the polls based on that actual fear.
It's insane, and I think to your point, I agree with you completely on this, and I think it's also that he truly believes you would trade deficit in their country. It means that you are somehow being taken advantage of.
That you're a loser, that you're losing out.
Loser.
Like it's a very simplistic understanding of that, right?
Yeah, that's what he thinks.
The thing that's especially frustrating, to just go off of your Canada example, I mean, the concessions that the Canadian government made to him after he, in early February, teased the imposition of these tariffs, they basically just said, hey, that thing we already passed related to bolstering border security back in December, they just like reminded him of it. They didn't even do anything different. And so there's just a certain amount of like, this is not a serious way to go about conducting your foreign policy. And that would be a forgivable offense, I suppose, if he weren't leaving hundreds of millions of people in the lurch trying to figure out how they're going to afford their groceries. I mean, to me, that's pretty unforgivable.
Do you think he's doing this just because he can? Because it's a way for him to look strong and tough and powerful? I mean, is that the simplest explanation for what he's doing? I kind of think it is.
I don't know if I buy that. I tend to give Trump a little bit more credit than many people do. I think that he is somewhat intelligent. I think he realizes that the playing the blustering fool plays really well. Like, I think he's smart enough for there's a little bit of 4D chess possibly going on. I'm not going to get all Scott Adams on you because I only believe that to a degree. The best possible thing that I can imagine is at play here is that Trump likes to have leverage and bargaining chips, and he's trying to figure out how he begins to go about conducting his foreign policy this term. And he cares a lot about attempting to get these countries to do what they want, as well as seemingly attempting to sort of heat up the relationship with China in a sense, sort of this weird escalatory thing that's going on, this tit for tat. And he sees Canada and Mexico by proxy as means of doing that. I also think there's a little bit of an imperialist strain to Trump 2.0. And I think that that's something worth freaking out about a little bit.
I won't Scott Adams you either. I'm more of a Dogbert than a Dilbert on this, but I think Trump wants people to underestimate him. And given that people's estimation is so low, there's only one way to keep doing that: go lower and lower and lower.
But on the leverage point, and I think you have maybe there is something to that. He has squandered his leverage, right? The liberals are rising in the polls right now. They have they are literally in the midst of an economic.
A little bit. This is
a little bit.
I think quite a little bit.
I just read this quote from the head of a polling firm in Canada. Said it's the swiftest increase.
The liberals in Canada. I thought you meant the liberals here. Okay.
No, liberals in Canada.
Withdrawn. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So he has the liberals who are about to jettison Trudeau this weekend, right, are now looking like they may actually hold on to the government in the next election.
Yeah, I don't think they're predicted that. I don't think that's a forecast now, but they're doing so much better with Krista.
Yes,
Krista
and all
Friedland,
because of Trump. And so any leverage he had with the Canadians has gone. They have actually have incentivized to hold out and to play hardball with the U.S. He is honestly, if this is leverage in negotiations, he is the single worst negotiator I've ever seen, without a doubt.
Last thing I want to do, and then we'll get to the Democrats. I'm going to read, there are the bromides that are a part of every one of these speeches, and let's put aside if he can do it or if he's sincere about it. But there was one part, and it stuck out to me, but I wonder your opinion. He said, this will be our greatest era. Yeah, whatever. With God's help. Okay, asterisk. Over the next 4 years, we are going to, and then he gives a litany of things that we'd all sign onto. We are going to lead this nation even higher. That'd be a good thing. We are going to forge the freest, okay, most advanced, most dynamic, and here's the part, most dominant civilization ever to exist on the face of this earth. Most dominant civilization. So let us play cheer it or fear it. I don't know what I think, but Liz Wolfe, cheer it or fear it, we're going to forge the most dominant civilization to exist.
Cheer it. Dominate me, baby.
All right.
No, I think that the big asterisk that I would attach to that answer is it should not be through military might. And it should not be through playing world policeman. And I think that we've actually seen some possibly promising indicators on that front that Trump is not necessarily interested in doing this via military might. I think he seems to believe this almost tech world, American dynamism, bring back, like, let's rebuild American industrial capacity, like, let's do great things, let's go to space type thing. I believe that interpreting him most charitably is what he is into. And if that is what he is talking about, then I am so on board. The thing that I'm not interested in, however, is attempting to seize a bunch of territory by putting boots on the ground. Right? Like, that seems bad.
You want to go to Mars.
So Michael Cohen.
Greenland, I think there's an interesting strategic
he's not going to get Greenland
there, but it can't be done via military might, in my opinion. It would have to be done via deal making with the Danish, right? Like I think it's worth taking these things seriously because it's easy to be dismissive,
deal with the Danish. But Michael Cohen, I want to ask you, cheer it or fear it, most dominant civilization on the ever to exist on Earth?
It depends. I mean, the fact of the matter is that we were the most dominant country in the world. I mean, we are the most dominant country in the world, and he's throwing that dominance away. So if it's him in charge of it, God, no, I don't. I'm going to fear that.
If the answer is fear it. And
I'd still fear it, but I would fear it less.
I got a McLaughlin. This one will be back in a minute to talk a little bit about that other group there holding some signs, the Democrats. Back in a minute with more Not Even Mad. We're back with Not Even Mad. I'm here with Liz Wolfe and Michael Cohen, and there were Democrats in the room. Al Green got himself thrown out. A few of them held placards. I found it embarrassing, but Michael Cohen, you're a Democrat, more of a, I think, self-identified Democrat than I am. And I know that a couple weeks ago on the show, you were essentially saying all the Democrats have to do is let Trump screw up. And this echoes something that James Carville was writing, that the Democrats should essentially play rope-a-dope because he's screwing himself with his policy. So do you think they shouldn't have succumbed to these antics? Or do you say, actually, that shows a little backbone and that doesn't really matter in the whole scheme of things?
You know what I would have done if I were Democrats? I would have gotten up and I would have walked out of the room the moment he attacked Biden. That's what I would have done. The signs were stupid. They made him look like idiotic, but who cares? It doesn't matter. None of this stuff really matters. I mean, I don't think it has any political impact whatsoever. Look, the Democrats, when I say they should walk out of the room, it's because I think they should just sit back and watch Trump burn down his approval ratings, which is already, I mean, his approval ratings have moved 8.5 points to the negative in 6 weeks. And that's Democrats basically flailing. That's all self-imposed by Trump. He has stepped on a rake every single day, it seems like, and he keeps doing it. And I think, and Liz is right, the tariff stuff is going to make this much worse. Democrats should just sit back and reap the whirlwind.
There's a bit of wish fulfillment, I think, with some of those polls. I see polls that show him at still slightly more approval than disapproval, which is a contradiction to his.
I mean, you look at the aggregators,
about that.
And aggregators both have him moving about 8 points to the negative since inauguration. Both Real Clear Politics and 538.
Well, they fired 538. Maybe that's bad news.
Heartbreaking.
Liz, what do you think? I mean, do you want to give the Democrats advice? Was it embarrassing to you, or a bit of cane wagging from Al Green did the trick?
I definitely don't want to give the Democrats advice because I kind of want them to lose a little bit here. It's not that I want Republicans to win either. I want everyone to embrace their true free market selves and live fully freely. No, I mean, I really liked the addition of the little Fogo de Chao Brazilian steakhouse paddles. That was really fun. It's very memeable, which is cute, but there's something that's very frustrating. I feel like every single podcast, every single political pundit has done some sort of conversation or some sort of article along these lines. Will Democrats engage in course correction? Will Democrats engage in soul searching? And I mean, over and over again, it really does seem to me that the answer is just no. And that frankly, we podcasters, we pundits should just stop asking this damn question.
Totally
it's
agree with that.
so annoying.
Totally agree.
It's so annoying. And
because the answer, you're saying the answer is so clearly no. What are we doing? Like,
the answer
they're just
is
going to be themselves.
The answer is so clearly no, but also I think they really, they did the resistance playbook the first time around. They did the pussy hats. That was more the grassroots class, but then, they did the kente cloths. They really did a lot of bending the knee to extreme far left, like identity politics, progressivism. And now, it's not totally clear what they do, how they respond to Trump. I mean, the fact of the matter is that he has sort of assembled a little bit of a broader coalition of supporters than he did the first time around. And I don't think there's an especially unified Democratic Party means of countering this, nor is there a clear person or set of people who can really lead it. I mean, we've seen to some degree AOC played this very dissident role quite a few years ago, and then she did a lot of kowtowing to the standard bearers of the party. Okay, so maybe AOC will rise again in some way. Okay, well, Gavin Newsom just started a podcast. We see people like Gretchen Whitmer being largely irrelevant. Kamala Harris will probably do something in California state politics. But I think the fact of the matter is that they're very disorganized right now. And, whether it's the Pod Save America guys arguing with Bill Maher or the sort of inept, flaccid Jacobin headlines that circulate. Well, that's the point that I'm making.
Yeah, no,
I'm saying
I agree. None of them matter.
None of them matter at all. And I think there's a real identity crisis. And I'm not sure why we keep asking the question when there's
I totally agree. And
indicator that
let me say one thing. I agree with everything Liz said. They have no power except in 9 days, the government's going to shut down. Okay? And Republicans do not have the votes to get a bill through the House. They might have to get through the House. Democrats can filibuster in the Senate. This is the chance they have leverage on, which is
what should they do? What's their
play? And basically, prevent or stop what Trump and Musk are doing in the federal government. And that's where they have to use their leverage.
You think they should shut the government down?
Doesn't it help what Trump and Musk are doing? They're also trying to shut the government down, right?
It's the only way you can get any kind of concessions out of the White House. It's the only way you can do it. I mean, I think government shutdowns tend to boomerang against the party in power. Especially the party that controls both branches of government and the presidency. And I think also it's the only way the Democrats can show some backbone. They can show to their own supporters that they're actually fighting for something. And it's the only tool they have to stop what Musk is doing. I mean, forget the politics for a second. The policy implications of what Musk and Trump are doing are awful, and it needs to stop. And if Democrats aren't going to toe the line when they have leverage, and they have such little leverage, then what are they going to do then? I don't know how they're going to.
Wouldn't that be such a critical mistake at a time when there's so much fervor, so much excitement and enthusiasm for the extreme gutting of the federal government? Like,
I think it'll remind people that they actually kind of rely on the government when they see national parks closed, when they can't get someone on the phone from the IRS in the middle of tax season. I think it'll piss them off.
but these things are already happening, right? Like
Yeah,
because
but
of the Doge.
they are already happening. They're going to be even worse. But your point, fine. I mean, look,
How won't the Democrats get blamed for the shutdown if they orchestrate the shutdown?
well, if Republicans cannot pass a spending bill in the House and they only have a two vote margin, they need Democratic votes. So if they can't pass something on their own, it's their fault. Now, if they do pass something, Democrats could filibuster in the Senate. I don't know if they're going to do that, but again, reason you do that is why would you give this administration more money when it's already making clear they're not going to spend the money you've already appropriated to them? I mean, this is the problem. I mean, and this is why I think government will shut down, because the Democrats are saying, well, you want us to give you more money, you're not spending what we already gave you. So how can we trust you that you're going to spend the money that we're giving you? And I think that actually creates a huge, and they keep trying to find some way to guarantee that Trump spends the money. I think that's going to create enough of a problem for Democrats. I also think there's going to be a revolt among Democrats. I think a lot of Democrats are upset and they're ticked off. And they want to stand on principle on something. They want to stand up to Trump, and this is the only way they can do it. So look, I mean, the politics of this are fraught. There's no question about it. But I think the internal politics of Democrats are worse. And if Democrats don't do this, and if they surrender on the government shutdown, I think that you're going to see just so much more anger.
I do think the Democrats will be
grassroots
blamed.
at the
Maybe it's
leadership of
worth
the
it.
party.
But if the vote is 215 Republicans and 200 against 214 Democrats and 3 Republicans, how would the Democrats not be blamed? It's overwhelmingly them that's shutting the government down. Yes, I know. I understand
No, because
control of the
Republicans
House, but
control
the
the
votes
House.
are
They
all
can't
but
get all the
3
members to vote for
Republicans
something?
have voted to keep it open. You could blame the rational blame would go to those 3
if
Republicans plus 214 Democrats, 100% of the Democrats.
the blame, I think, would go to Republicans for not being able to get all their members online to pass a bill. Now, if they filibuster something in the Senate, which is much difficult, then they will get blamed. But I say, fine, get blamed. You're not going to pay a price for it now. The midterm elections are 20 months away. You take the hit now because you stand on principle for something, it'll be forgotten by November 2026.
It looks like my audit risk has gone down if the IRS will in fact be shutting down over the next few months, whether through Doge or through government shutdown.
So,
it sure looks
I
like Liz
don't
Wolfe
put
is off
yourself in the
hook here.
crosshairs or in the bullseye, Liz, in case this doesn't happen by identifying it. But that would be a good thing. Now let's talk about a bad thing or a thing that gets your goat or grinds your gear. It's our goat grinders, those little or perhaps maximum annoyances that you had to deal with in the last week. Liz, do you have one for us, a goat grinder?
Oh yes, it's the playgrounds of New York City. 2 weekends ago was outside playing with my son on a 45 or 50-degree day at a playground managed by the Hudson River Park Trust. And turns out they feel the need to padlock this playground because there had been recently snow and ice, as is frequent during New York City winter. And they decided to padlock this playground for the safety of the children. So naturally, I, helped boost my son over the fence. And then I climbed over the fence with him. And, then I started liberating, dozens of other kids who also wanted to hop the fence and come play. And then I went down the slide.
With their parents' permission or just like a Pied Piper of children?
It was a little bit of both, I would say. There was some amount of Pied Piper energy. I was in my finest church dress and I come down the slide immodestly, legs up in the air, come down going, whee! And then there is the NYC Parks law enforcement officer trying to write me a ticket for, I suppose, breaking and entering, for trespassing and helping about 25 other little children trespass. So I maintain that the city is totally wrong and that I'm totally right, even if I looked ridiculous, and that children should be allowed to play in 50-degree weather at their own risk on wonderful playgrounds in New York City.
Well, how much was the ticket for?
They did not. So I argued with them for a while. They did not end up writing it for me. I got their badge numbers and have been on the phone a lot with the Parks Department and the Park Trust, trying to figure out basically, I'm not trying to get any one individual person in trouble, but I would like to get these stupid policies changed because look, I'm raising an active 2.5-year-old. It is so much better to me that he goes out and plays and stretches his legs than resorts to a life of crime or at least sedentary time in front of the television. I'm sorry, but like these are just basics that so many other societies have figured out, and for whatever reason, our society hasn't.
You don't want to just go to jail for a day like Henry David Thoreau?
I would love I would love to not have to cook the meals constantly.
All right, here's my goat grinder. The Oscars, I was watching the Oscars and I didn't like it much. And that's not the goat grinder. My goat grinder is afterwards when people give their assessment of the Oscars and it's something like, oh, well, you're not supposed to like it much. You're not? It's entertainment. In fact, it's entertainment about entertainment. But I have heard so often, and especially this year, oh, of course it's long, or oh, of course they have all these boring awards to get to, or oh, of course the speeches are going to go too long. After these series of courses, at what point do we say, well, then it's just a non-entertaining event? I heard a little bit of this with SNL's 50. Oh, of course it's very hard to program this event. Oh, it's hard to figure out who's going to be in which sketch. And so what are we supposed to do? Pretend we're like the fantasy camp version of Lorne Michaels and not really enjoy it, but just try to figure out in our head how we produce it? I do not like this trend of giving supposed entertainment a pass for not being entertaining because it's, quote, not supposed to be entertaining. When what we're really saying is we've known for a long time that year in and year out, we're not entertained by it. I remember the Super Bowls in the 1990s used to be big blowouts and they weren't good. And there was some of this creeping in. Oh, we know the AFC or NFC championship game is the real Super Bowl. Oh, we know this is going to be boring. And then the Super Bowls started getting really good. And it was a lot better. And instead of making the excuse about why non-entertainment is the real entertainment, just give me the entertainment. So that's where I am with the Oscars, and that's where I am with this argument. What am I, a relative of Irving Thalberg? I have to watch this thing for posterity's sake? Entertain me, and definitely don't tell me that it's not my right to be entertained by this piece of entertainment about entertainment, ostensibly. Michael Cohen, what is your goat grinder?
I mean, there's a lot. I'm gonna give a shout out to the stomach bug that has been basically afflicting me for the past 6 days.
Shout out to the bug. Pour one out.
That has grinded my goat.
You did out of both ends, right?
Yeah, in more ways than one. So this is a rather sort of stand-up comedian kind of thing, but I'm just gonna bring it up because it drives me up a wall.
You ever notice?
Yeah, I'm flying back. I went to Iceland. That's where I got food poisoning and vertigo. Yeah, so I'm flying back. We landed at JFK. It's been a long flight. We're all kind of tired. Icelandic Air is not a great airline. It's kind of tight and compact, and it's really hot on the plane. We hit the gate. Everyone around me gets up. They get up. They get their bags out. They stand in the thing. They're hitting you with the bag. And I swear to God, it took all of my self-control not to just punch somebody. Look, this isn't complicated, people. You just wait. You sit down. When your lane comes up, your row, then you get up and then you get your stuff. Because if you get up before, it slows everything down. Okay? You're not getting out any faster and you're making life miserable for everyone around you who's sitting down, who's doing the right thing. So please, Americans, I beg of you, remain seated until your row is ready to exit the plane. Please.
When I went to Iceland, I flew something called Wow Air. It's now
I've heard of Wow Air. Yeah, sure.
You would be aloft and say, Wow Air. But yes, I do not think that. See, I would think that Icelandic Airlines, having been run by the proper Scandinavian people of Iceland, some question whether Iceland belongs properly in Scandinavia, would be a little more formal. But it was the Americans on Icelandic Air who were ruining it for everyone, you were saying.
Let me tell you something, though. I spent a week in Iceland. These are not the warmest people in the world. They are not.
Well, why do you think that might be?
I mean, I have a suspicion, but can I tell one more thing really quick? When I went to the hospital, I'm checking out. I asked for my receipt. She couldn't print it for me. And I said, well, print it out for me, please. And she's like, well, you can just call tomorrow. Like, I don't want to call tomorrow. I don't want to call. I said, can you print it out for me? And she goes, she takes out this piece of paper. She writes the number down and she goes, this is the phone number. You know how to use a phone, don't you? That's what she said to me. You know how to use a phone, don't you?
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know where I'm going to put this?
Harsh.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry I had to suffer those indignities and the added on indignity of the stomach bug, but Michael Cohen, I want to thank you.
My pleasure, as always.
And Liz Wolfe, I want to thank you.
Thank you so much.
And we will say that we're not saying we're right. We're not saying you're right. Definitely not. But we are saying we're not even